Genshin Impact has often been praised as completely avoiding power creep by making different units instead of just better units. In fact, during certain points of the game, reverse power creep was often touted as a problem, with some new units feeling weaker than old ones. But that has all changed in Fontaine, where I believe that power creep has defined the meta for almost every single character release. So let's talk about why that is and whether or not this is a problem. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I want to first take this time by going through the history of Genshin, because on release, we had the strongest characters in the game remain the strongest characters in the game for an extremely long time. And of course, I'm talking about Bennett, Xingqiu, Xiangling, Fischl, and Sucrose. And whether or not people knew that these were the strongest characters in the game, I mean, most people didn't, but they figured it out pretty quickly, more quickly than people, I think, online give them credit for, although these people weren't as popular at the time, at least from what I've been able to discern. Obviously, Venti was extremely strong at the beginning, but he was nerfed with the types of enemies. Klee and Child were strong, and it was really Hu Tao, Ganyu, and Zhao that were considered the big three for DPS. Kazuo originally wasn't considered power creep, although as Venti got worse, and hyper carry and mono teams got better and better, Kazuo got better, vape teams kind of fell off a little bit, and grouping was more important, and the damage bonus was valued higher, so Sucrose wasn't as good. And basically what I'm saying is all throughout the first year of Genshin and throughout the second year, we didn't really get power creep. We sort of just got side grades. Like, things were better, some things were worse. You know, Ayaka was sort of, upon release, like, she eventually power crept Ganyu, but upon release was sort of just a side grade to Ganyu. Yoimiya was a downgrade to Hu Tao. Raiden was just a new DPS. We didn't have really anything like Raiden. She's, even today, she's still kind of weird, as she's not strictly just a DPS, but not really a support either. Kokomi just sort of different, Shenhe different, Arataki Ito the first Geo DPS. So we're still kind of, throughout Inazuma, we're still just laying the groundwork for the different types of characters. Yaimiko could have been a power creep to Fischl, but she wasn't. She was just side grade, downgrade, different. Ayato first on field Hydro DPS, but definitely didn't power creep anything. Yelan, you could argue, was the first instance of power creep, but even then, especially without Hydro Resonance, she wasn't that much of an upgrade in terms of damage to Xingqiu. Like, she is, and she does give buffing to the on-fielder, which is better, but she doesn't have the defensive utility, so there's sort of a pro and con. But she's definitely the closest thing. Basically, it's kind of like Kazuo, a bit of an upgrade, bit of a side grade, but not really what you'd call power creep. And then in Inazuma was also more different. It wasn't really better. We obviously got new Electro DPS with Sino. Nilou was just different. Nahida, different. Dendro seemed to power creep the other elements, but even then it's not really just better. It was, again, just different. Wanderer, just different than Zhao. Now he's not even as good as Zhao, with Zhao getting Shen Yun. Alhaitham obviously being the best Dendro DPS, but again, he's the first one. So all throughout, basically what I'm saying is all throughout Mondstadt and Liyue, all throughout Inazuma, and all throughout Sumeru, we basically got horizontal expansion of the character roster. And Fontaine, which I'm going to show you now that we have the groundwork laid, is the first region to introduce upgrades to old characters. Now, we started off a little bit tame with Linny. Yes, he's an upgrade in terms of many DPS. He's almost one of the best DPS if you can play him perfectly. But because he has such big downsides in terms of gameplay, most people don't feel him as any sort of power creep to Hu Tao. Maybe to Klee they do. I definitely feel him as an upgrade to Klee. But Hu Tao sort of still kind of takes the cake in an actual practical DPS. Wriothesley, again, is just different than Ganyu and Ayaka. Whereas Ayaka and Ganyu have kind of fell off because Cryo is much less good these days. Wriothesley just has good teams. He's not really power creeping anything in terms of units. He just has good teams. But it was obviously Novelette that was the first instance of true power creep, basically just being a power creep Ayato, and basically just being the DPS ceiling for all DPS, especially when you include the ease of use and the comfort. Farina essentially power creeping any any support and off-field DPS being just basically better Yelan. Of course, she does require you to have a healer, so you have this trade-off, but the result is just so strong. I think people still underrate just how much damage and how much buffing that Furina gives. Definitely the best character in the game right now. Navia being power creep in the sense of a Geo DPS, she's definitely just better than Ito. And being a Geo Claymore on-field DPS, yes, she's not exactly a power creep to Ito because Ito, of course, is a mono Geo character, whereas Navia is generally just a double Geo character, but I feel like it still kind of relates. We have actually good 4-stars with Chevreuse and Gaming, especially when you get them to higher constellations. They actually do compete. They're the first 4-stars to be released that truly, well, along with Farazan, I guess, but Farazan's only at C6, whereas these two are good without C6, and then at C6, they finally are characters that actually compete with the base roster 4-stars, with Chevreuse definitely comparing to maybe all but Bennett, and Gaming being a DPS, so not as valuable, but still very, very good character. Shen Yun basically being the first healer that gives a very large buff. When you think about this, and you think about all the healers we've got in Genshin, we've got Baiju, we've got Kokomi, what other limited healers do we have? We don't have very many, do we? Even expanding to limited shielders, we only have Zhongli. These characters have very limited buffing capabilities, with both Baiju and Kokomi basically getting by on the fact that they apply a good element. But in terms of actual healing and actual buffing or actual damage, Shen Yun just provides way, way more than other healers do. So I think I would argue her being a power creep unit, Chiori being basically a power creep Albedo, always better than Albedo in every situation. Even if you only have just one other Geo on the team, or even no other Geos on the team, she's better. Yeah, she's just better than Albedo. And then if you do have a construct on the team with another Geo, then she's just way better than Albedo. And finally, what really convinced me that we are in the nation of power creep is, of course, Arlecchino. Whereas Arlecchino also hits the same levels, if not higher levels of DPS than Novelette, but basically just outpaces every other Pyro DPS that we have. Whereas Linny only outpaced them theoretically, Arlecchino outpaces practically as well. She outpaces Hu Tao, she outpaces Klee, she outpaces everyone. And so when you take the look at all the limited and the 4-star characters, even Charlotte is really, really a good 4-star character, especially considering that we have Furina, especially providing the heals that she does. And if you're able to build her with Thrilling Tales, which you can do if you have high constellations, that's actually a pretty powerful unit. I think people pretty underrate Charlotte. You know, looking at this roster of characters, while Wriothesley doesn't technically power creep the other two crowd DPSs, he is better, whereas Linny doesn't technically power creep the other ones, he almost does. We really are looking at just a different breed of characters. Genshin seems to be done with releasing side grade or downgrade characters, or even characters that could be perceived as a side grade or downgrade. And I did want to put this into context with the new characters we have coming out, being Clorand, Sigewinne, and Sethos. Because I personally would be shocked if, especially the limited characters out of these, namely Clorand for sure, probably Sigewinne, and probably not Sethos, just being better than what we already have. I would say that Clorand is going to be an Electro DPS. Obviously, we're not going to be discussing any sort of dreams or unofficially announced information. But can you imagine, after all of these characters have just been released in Fontaine, if they were to release a character that wasn't an upgrade in terms of DPS to what we currently have? Because I think, like I said, Raiden is basically the current premier Electro DPS, and she is behind other DPS in terms of sheer numbers. She does make up for this somewhat by the fact that she still does good damage if you put her in good teams. She still has good driver roles, and she also has infinite interruption resistance, and she makes it easier to build your team because she provides ER, so you can get some more damage off of off-field DPSs that way. But if they were to release a character that didn't power creep Raiden, at least in terms of an on-field DPS, probably not in terms of a driver or in terms of a Hyperbloom trigger, but let's be real, even though she's a good driver and a good Hyperbloom trigger, she's hardly the only character that can be a driver or a Hyperbloom trigger. I don't think it's any coincidence that they are releasing Clorand as the power creep to Raiden. I understand it's not a true power creep because Raiden will still, even if she's power crept as a hyper carry, she will still have driver roles and Hyperbloom roles, and the fact that she can be a hyper carry gives her this flexibility aspect that will still give her account value. But look at this. They clearly designed Clorand to appeal to Raiden Shogun lovers. and people who like Raiden Shogun. Like, the design aspects are very, very obvious. They know that people like me, Raiden is my favorite character in the game. They know that people like me, I love the design of this character. Maybe not everyone. Maybe there's some super diehard Raiden stans that refuse to cheat on their waifu and will not even look at Clorand. But I think that they're doing this on purpose. And I think that Clorand will be the next power creep electro DPS, and she'll be in a similar vein. Who knows if she's on more of a Navia level or if she's more on an Arlecchino level. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I kind of doubt that she'll be on an Arlecchino level right after releasing Arlecchino, but I have to point you to our brother in arms, Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail is just shy of shameless power creep every single patch. They are not doing the elegant widening situation of widening of the horizontal meta landscape the same way that Genshin is widening the horizontal meta landscape, the way that they did for the first 2 years. In Honkai Star Rail, if you're not familiar, we had Dan Heng, who completely power crept the DPSs at the time. The very next patch, we had Jing Liu, who power crept the DPSs at the time. We had Luocha, who power crept the healers. Then we had Fu Xuan, who power crept the healers. Then we had Huohuo, who didn't quite power creep Fu Xuan, but she definitely power crept Luocha. Then we had Aventurine, who pretty much power crept the other healers as well, because he's a sustain that does damage. If you're not into Honkai Star Rail, don't worry about it. Basically, I'm just trying to tell you that they also kept they keep power creeping the old stuff. They keep making the new stuff better and better and better. We had Ron Mei, who power crept the supports. Then Sparkle, who didn't quite power creep Ron Mei, but then we have Robin, who looks like she's going to power creep Ron Mei. And then, of course, we have Acheron, who power crept the DPSs in Honkai Star Rail as well. And it seems like people don't really mind. They generally are liking the new characters being more and more and more powerful. And it seems like, in general, that Genshin is also liking this too. And basically what I'm saying is Genshin has taken a lot of cues from Honkai Star Rail and put it into Genshin in terms of quality of life. Hopefully other stuff as well that Arlecchino is telling me not to talk about in case I get in trouble. But also, I think that they're taking this notion of just making the new characters a little bit tuned up, just a little bit just dialed up on the power meter. And so what does this mean for the future? Because previously in gacha, the general rule of gacha is newer is better. But for Genshin, it hasn't always been like that. Like, a newer character or an older character, like old characters are still very relevant, especially old 4 stars, but also old 5 stars. They were very, very relevant. Even Zhao and Hu Tao to this day are still some of the best DPSs. Kaidahara Kazuha, still one of the best supports, released during the first patch. And Yelan, being released a very long time ago, but still one of the best pickups. There's still a lot of old characters, but nowadays, and especially in terms of DPS, you're sort of just like, you could pick up any of the DPSs from Fontaine. You could pick up any character from Fontaine, and they're pretty much at this new level of power. So I definitely think that Clorand and Sejuin and Sethos, as long as, Sejuin and Clorand are both limited 5 stars, I think they're definitely going to continue on this trend. Someone pointed out that Sejuin, maybe she'll be a Hydro Shielder because we don't have a Hydro Shielder yet. I still think because she's a healer in the lore that it just makes sense for her to be a healer. But like, after thinking about this more, like, I wouldn't be surprised if she's just a power crept Kokomi. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Clorand is a power crept Raiden who has a little bit less quality of life, but you trade that for a lot more damage. So people can cope and say she's technically not power creeping Raiden because Raiden has all these other things, but in reality, for the most part, she'll just be better Raiden. And so what does this mean for you? I think at this point, this is sort of a warning and a PSA to the newish players of Genshin who don't have your accounts fully built out yet. Do not just drop your primos on the newest, latest, greatest DPS just because people are saying they're the newest, latest, and greatest. It used to be that you could maybe keep up with the best DPSs in the game, for example, because some of the best DPSs were Hu Tao and Zhao. Then maybe Raiden would be considered a good DPS, although people didn't like her. She still has national as well. Forgot to mention that. But like, we had Alhaitham was the first best DPS in a long time. And then we had Novelette in a long time. But now, Riley's pretty close. Not close to Novelette, but he's a great DPS. Navia, great DPS. And now Arlecchino pushing the limit. You might start to see more and more characters, and I'd be shocked if this doesn't continue into Natlan, more and more characters coming out and being at the top of the tier list. The tier list is finally getting the old characters pushed down. We're finally getting characters that are matching and exceeding the original roster of the game, which I think is fine, where they're not leagues above it, right? The original roster is still extremely strong. They're not leagues above it, but we're finally seeing characters not just land in sort of the upper mid portion, and they're actually landing in the top tier. We just didn't see that many characters, maybe 1 to 2 characters hit the top tier, and 1 to 2 DPSs hit the higher tier of DPS. Now we're getting most characters are in the upper echelons. Like, I think the fact that people doom posted Chiori really shows how overtuned the Fontaine characters are, because she is overall one of the better Genshin Impact characters. She's better than a lot of the characters in the game right now. But in the context of the Fontaine characters, she feels like she doesn't bring as much to the table. So be careful about just getting every new best character. Don't just get the new character because people are saying that they're OP. Obviously, Arlecchino is OP, but most characters these days are becoming more and more OP. It didn't used to be that way, though. We're not just hyping up these characters just for the sake of it. It really is the case that the new characters are really strong. That's just the facts. And I know it's weird because it didn't used to be like that, right? We're used to getting Dea here and there, having Wanderer being a little, or Sino being a little undertuned, right? Having Ayato being good but not great, Yaimiko being good but not great, Ito being good but not great, Shenhe being good but very niche, you know, Kokomi being, you know, good, but it's just based on her elemental application kind of thing. Nowadays, all the new characters have hit this higher level. So I really implore you, stick to your favorites, stick to your budgets. Don't just get new OP characters just for the sake of it. Get them when they are your favorites or when they make your favorites happen. If you're like me and you like getting strong characters, you just have to be a little bit more picky and choosy. Wait a little longer until we've had our hands on the characters for longer and we can make more videos about them. I think it's pretty clear that Arlecchino really is living up to what she promised, but I don't think that you need to just go crazy for her if you don't want her. If you want Clorand, if you're preferring Clorand, I really think she's going to be very, very good as well. And this is not based on leaks. This is not based on predictions. This is not based on anything, or it is a prediction. It's not based on leaks. It's not based on dreams. It's just the pattern that we've seen. And also remember, these characters will always rerun. So saving and waiting and getting characters on the rerun after they've been established can also be a really, really good idea. And I also wanted to point out that Fontaine's not only the nation of power creep, but it's also the nation of DPS characters. Like Linny is an on-field DPS, Novelet's the on-field DPS, Riot is the on-field DPS, Frina off-field DPS and support, Navia on-field DPS, Shenyan is an off-field DPS, is a support and an on-field DPS, Chiori is an off-field DPS, Arlecchino is an on-field DPS. So most of the characters have been on-field DPSs, but I will say that most characters usually are on-field DPSs regardless. We usually have a bit more supports than this and a bit more off-field, but I don't think it's that different than usual, but it is definitely higher. It's definitely a higher rate of on-field DPSs. And the on-field DPSs, I think it honestly makes sense for them to be stronger than they were these days. I think it's better because this has been support impact for a long, long time, and I think it's okay for off-field DPS to get a bump up in power on-field DPS because off-field felt too strong before, and on-field felt kind of like an afterthought. Like you just throw them in, and as long as you have good off-field supports, you're fine. But nowadays with Arlecchino and Novelet and even Navia to a degree and Linny, we're finally getting on-field DPS that hold their own and that make their team strong because they do so much damage and they bring so much to the table, not just because they're essentially drivers for the off-field DPS like most other characters were before. I think it makes sense that they bumped up the power of the on-field DPS. So I think that this discussion was very much worth having. I think it's very important that you don't get caught in a position where where every new character is hyped up and you're buying into the hype, and it's not that the hype is fake, it's just that Genshin has decided to make characters stronger. And I don't think that I don't see the power creep keep creeping, but I do see it staying at this new higher level that is just better, at least for Natlan. I don't see it going too much beyond that. I think we're going to get a bit more different stuff in Natlan and stay at this new higher Fontaine level. So that's what I think. Let me know your thoughts. Take care. Bye for now.